Okay, so now that we've had a bit of an introduction to wireframe.cc, a free online wireframing tool that's purposely simple, we're going to start to build out the application that I explained briefly in the previous video. So this is my plan for the application and my very low fidelity, dodgy storyboard that I've put together for a few different screens. Now, remember, I'm not going to do wireframes for every single screen of the app. I'm only going to put it together for a subset of the screens of the app. But here's an overview of the functionality. So we do want the app to have a login screen, which I am going to wireframe, and that's the one I'll start with. We are going to have a home screen as well that I didn't put over here because it's not really functionality. It's not a use case. Users don't go and open up the app to go to the home screen. That's not something which happens. But we do need to be able to log in, and we do need a home screen. We're also going to put in a news screen as well, which I won't wireframe, but we might have an option for it on the home screen. Same as the document management, the staff management, and then staff management is broken down into a whole series of different screens. We want to be able to see a list of all of our staff members and to see a summary of each one. We also want to be able to focus in on one staff member and to view all of their details. And we also want to be able to do things like add and edit and delete. And so we'll go through and we'll outline each of those bits of functionality more specifically. Now, very importantly to remember as well that this application, or in this scenario, we've got two different types of users. So we have basically regular staff who only have partial access to the system, and then we're going to have managers on the other side that have additional access to the system. So for example, managers, they can do things like adding, editing, deleting staff members and seeing all the details about a staff member. But a regular staff member, they're only going to see a summary of someone's information, and they're not going to be able to add, edit, or delete. So we are going to have different screens showing basically a privileged user, a manager, versus an unprivileged user of a regular staff member as well. So, and I'll explain that as we go through. So let's jump back into wireframe.cc and we can start getting our wireframe happening. So, login. And you can choose whatever you want. You can follow me exactly, or you can, do a bit of a choose your own adventure. It really doesn't matter. So you can do whatever you want. So what I'm going to start with is a great whopping big logo. And remember, I have snap to grid turned on. So that is helping me quickly and easily draw things out into my app. So I can quickly and easily just say, look, there's my logo. It's going to be an image. And you can use the keyboard shortcuts. I didn't explain that. I won't use the keyboard shortcuts in this video because it's easy enough for me just to go and click on things. But you can use, B for box and I for image and things like that if you want to. So I'm going to say this is going to be the big company logo. Now, honestly, it's pretty obvious that that's going to be the company logo. But if you want to add a little bit more context, you can, of course, just do something like draw another little box over the bottom of the logo like this. Say that it's going to be regular text. Just go in and say something like, company logo or logo. Let's just call it logo. That'll be simpler. And the formatting on this is pretty terrible at the moment. So I'm just going to change the alignment to be centered. And I'm going to make the text smaller because it doesn't need to be obvious. And I'll make it italicized as a little comment. Now, if you want to go through and change its color or something as well, you can, if you want it to be kind of ghosted out. And so now we've just got this tiny little comment that, if someone's like, what is this big image? Is it a beautiful Windows XP desktop background or something? No, it's the company logo. That's what we're putting in there. So we've got the logo sitting there. I might put in a title next. So I'm just going to come in here and say, look, I'm just going to, and you might notice that I've just kept the same borders or margin on either side. And this is going to help me to center my text really, really easily. So, so basically I'm just counting in my case, 4 cells, which is 40 pixels from either side. And that's going to keep everything aligned. Now, I could put in headline at this stage, but remember that headline is just a placeholder. It's just blocks. I don't want that. I want the actual text to be in here. Now, in my opinion, I think that the main title or heading of each screen or page of an app is one of the most important bits of text to actually type in because it defines the entire context of that screen. Now, other bits of text like paragraphs and actual values for people's names and whatever, I don't really care about those things, but labels and headings can be very, very important to communicate. I don't really want to put in a headline like this because the client's just going to be like, well, what does that say? Like, what is that thing? I'm not even sure what it is. And honestly, I can't blame them. I'd be asking the same questions too. So with something like a heading, I'm going to put it in as text and say, well, this is going to be like the login page, but of course I want it to be bigger. And you can change whatever alignment that you want again. You can mess around with bold and all that kind of stuff if you want to as well. But now it's kind of clear, well, this is the login screen. You know, we don't have to answer questions about what this thing is anymore. Now, there's not going to be much else on this particular screen. So I'm just going to go through and put in an email address as like a username field and a password. And I'll put it together as a fairly standard kind of form with the labels above the inputs. So I'm just going to come in here again, and I'm just going to say, look, to make my life easier, I'm basically making these full width. So I'm going to put in text, and this is going to be someone's email address over here. And then underneath that, I'm just going to put in what is going to be my text input for the form. And some parts of this I'll do fairly quickly, so you're not just watching me do something very slowly. The first time I'll demonstrate something, I'll do it very slowly and make sure that you know exactly why I'm doing something. But after a while, I am going to start to do things like copying and pasting to show you how you can try to speed up your workflows a little bit. So I could make this a box, but I'm going to change it into a text input. The only difference being that it has that little cursor position in it to show how you should type here. Now, the only thing which might make this more believable or more realistic, which you don't have to put in, but you can if you want to. So if I'll just move these things down a bit, is placeholder text. Now, you don't have to do this, especially for a low fidelity wireframe, but I'll just show you one thing that you can do. So if I double click on this particular shape, you might notice that I'm not getting any options for text. Right? So with the regular rectangle or the box, I could add text inside it. With this text input, I can't do that. But of course, what I can do is I can draw another box over the top of it. And if you're interested, there is actually an option under settings, which I'll show you later, which was, can I draw one shape on top of another? And I have that turned on. It's on by default. And so in this case, I'm going to draw a box over the top of the previous one, say that it's going to be text, so that I can type in something like, person name at, company.com. And I'm going to make this text a bit smaller. Oh, actually, I could leave it the same size, but I might make it italicized, and I might make it a light gray or a lighter gray. And now, this, you might notice that what I'm trying to do is get this vertically centered at this point, but because snap to grid is turned on and because of the size of the text input that I've put in, I can't actually get the alignment exactly where I want it. And if I press up and down, like the up and down arrows on my keyboard, you can notice that this is really jumping quite a lot up and down. Now, this is one of those cases where I would actually go, well, you know what? I don't want align to grid or snap to grid anymore because it's stopping me doing what I need to do. So what I'm going to do is go into my settings, turn off snap to grid, and that will allow me to press that when I press the up and down arrows or when I click and drag, you can notice that I can now move between the grids, between the grid lines. So I can more easily change all of this. So there we go. So that's fairly believable about that being a placeholder value. If you're going back into layout mode, you might want to turn snap to grid back on again now that you've finished your little specific alignment. Now, I need to do the same thing, but for password. Now, I don't want to go and recreate those items again for two different reasons. One is it's costly in terms of time, right? If I've already created them, I should probably just try to duplicate them or copy and paste them. But secondly, as well, if I recreate them from scratch again, they're probably going to be slightly different sizes or slightly different formats or slightly different alignments. Something's going to be different between them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my placeholder, hold down Shift, and click on the text input, and keep Shift held down while I click on the label. So you can see that I've got all three selected. There's another way that you can select three items in wireframe.cc. If I click and drag from the top left to the bottom right, we know what that does. It wants me to add a new element to my wireframe. But if I click and drag from the bottom right up, it ends up as a selection tool in wireframe.cc instead. So if I go from the bottom right up to the top left, the reverse from where I was selecting before, I can go and select those three items in bulk. And that works for basically anything, right? So you just start down here. I've got those two items selected. So you can just click, hold down Shift, and click again. Or you can just say, you know what? I want all three of those things. Gone. Gotcha. Control C or Command C, depending what operating system you're on. Control V or Command V for paste. And of course, we can just align this again. Something like that. There we go. We've got email. Now you might notice as well, because I turned align to grid back on again, snap to grid, because this option was turned back on again, my little text box for the placeholder has snapped up one position, because it looked at this and was like, you've moved this down by like 5 pixels, so I'm going to snap it back to 0 or 10 pixels, one of the two. And just to demonstrate that to you, if I turn this option off, if I turn off snap to grid and I paste again, you might notice that the alignment is correct now. Now, when I'm moving these things around, it's a little bit more difficult to align them with the edge. So I have to be a lot more careful with how I'm aligning things, but you can see that the placeholder maintained its vertical alignment. So whether or not you guys find snap to grid useful in different situations, just play with it, see what you're comfortable with, what works the way that you think it should work, and go with that. So I'm just going to come in here and change the text to be password instead, and the placeholder text is just going to be something. So a bunch of asterisks. So after we've got the password in place, the last element that we're going to put in is a login button. So for that one, I do want to have snap to grid turned on for this one, because I'm not copying and pasting, I'm not doing specific alignment or anything. I'm creating a new shape. So I'm going to come in and just say, look, somewhere down here, let's put in a login button that's, about this big. And obviously that's not centered at the moment, but I can easily sort that out later. So I'm going to make this a box or a rectangle. I'm going to slightly round its corners because that kind of works for buttons. I'm going to, I can drag it into the center, or we could do other alignment actually. So up here, I could say align elements and tell it to be, horizontally centered, wherever that is, over here, align middle. So if I've got it way over on the left, I can just come over and you can see that there's an axis here and we're aligning it around that. I can double click on here and just put in some text for this button of login, and you can format this however you want. So you can go and change fill color if you want it. Again, I did mention before that I might use this tomato highlight color as being, if this is the main call to action button of the page, then I might highlight this one as being, this is the button you're supposed to click. You don't have to follow that. It doesn't really make a difference. So I might just change that. Probably don't need a border color or an outline. And then my text color is going to need to change because I changed the fill color. So we could have something like that. And that's it. That's going to be the login screen. So we've got a logo sitting up the top there with the incredibly helpful caption or title of logo. We've got a main title for this screen. We've got an email, username. We've got a password. We've got a login button at that stage. And that's it. We're done for that particular wireframe. So at that stage, just hit Control S or make sure that you've hit that save button, and you should then end up with this URL that you can come back to later if you want to edit these things. And you can, if you want to, you can also take a copy of these if you want to take a screenshot or something, and you can put it away in a little Word document or something as you go along. So if you wanted to do that, just to take note of things, you can, of course, come across and open up something like Word and say, look, we're going to have a login screen over here. So I might just put this in as the heading 2 and just say this is going to be staff management app wireframes. There we go. And I'm trying not to worry about formatting too much here. We've got our login screen. At that stage, I might go and grab a copy of my URL for this wireframe and just slap it in there so that I've got a reference to it later on. And then, of course, we might want to take a screenshot of that particular wireframe and put it in here as well. Now, if you are taking a screenshot, so actually one thing I will mention, you might have noticed when I went into the free versus premium comparison, one of the things in the premium version is that there is an export feature that becomes available. So you can't really export in the free version, but of course you can do things like screenshot, which is a form of export. So what I would do is just go into settings, turn off the grid so that we don't get the graph paper background. Then of course you can grab whatever the screenshotting tool is on your operating system. I'm on Windows 10, so Windows Shift S for snip or screenshot is going to be the go. And then of course you can just line it up fairly nicely, take a little screenshot of that region. So I'm just making sure I get the surrounds of the device in there, the phone. There's my screenshot. I can go back to Word and just paste that in. And we're done. So obviously you've got your little screenshot sitting in there. And so then we can move on to the next screen. Now, you might be needing a copy of these wireframes for something like a report you're putting together for the client. You might just be putting together a collection of screenshots to send to them in an email or something. Whatever it is, it's a really good idea when you're finished with a particular wireframe just to grab a screenshot of it and then to have that ready to go later. Now, if you're particularly picky and you don't want things like this light gray background, you can again go into settings and change the fill color. It's going to be the canvas color. So maybe you can't change it at the moment because I think the stroke color, the defaults you're not going to be able to change. So if you're really picky about the light gray background, you could do some sort of background removal later, or change the CSS of this particular web page, but I'm not going to bother with that. We've got other stuff to work on. So there you go. So there is one wireframe done for one of the screens of this app. So login screen is done. I've got my URL, so I can go back to wireframe.cc and edit this wireframe in the future. I've got a screenshot of the wireframe, so I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be the home screen. So again, I can just put in a little heading for this and then, use the same technique to start a new wireframe document. Now, the home screen, I'm just going to pull up my original storyboard dodgy sketches for this particular application. The login screen is quite different in terms of layout to all the other screens. So you might notice that all the other screens that I've storyboarded here have the same navigation at the bottom. They have a very similar logo in the top left, profile sort of icon in the top right, very similar titles or headings, and then the rest is kind of different, but they've got a lot of shared components. but login doesn't have much that's shared with any of the other screens. So for the home screen, I'm just going to start fresh, and we're just going to start a completely new wireframe from scratch. But when we go from home to viewing all staff or to do something else, I'm going to make much more use of copy and paste at that stage, because that's going to save me a lot of time and effort, and it's going to improve consistency as well. And I do want these wireframes to be consistent. And of course, I want to save time and effort. So back to wireframe.cc, and I'm just going to basically load up the website again. So right click, open a new tab, or control click. And this is going to open up a completely new wireframe for me. So you can see that this one hasn't been saved or anything. It's new. Now, I have no idea why the columns setting has been remembered. This is a weird series of changes. But what I want to do is to make my canvas look more like this one again. So I want to go and change this to be portrait phone, portrait mobile. I want to go into my settings. I don't want columns. I do want snap to grid. I want my grid size to be 10 pixels. And I'm also not sure why the grid was, so show grid was turned on, but it wasn't actually showing. So I just turned it off and turned it back on again. So now we've got it displaying down here, and I'm ready to get started again with my next layout, my next wireframe. So this is going to be the home screen. Now, according to my little storyboard over here, I want to have a logo in the top left. I want to have like an account kind of profile icon in the top right. And I want to have a heading, so a main sort of title for the screen. And then underneath that somewhere, I want to have right at the very bottom of the app screen, I want to have my navigation icons down there as well. So let's get into creating all those. Now, remember, I do have Snap to Grid turned on, and so that's why I'm going to be able to easily draw out things like, here is a logo. So I'm going to put in an image for a placeholder. Again, if you want to label this as being a logo, you can. So you can go and draw in a little text element somewhere, make it text, change it just to say logo, make it nice and small. So these are the exact same steps that I used before. And I think I changed the color earlier. There we go. Now, remember, you don't need to add these little captions and things. I'm just showing you that you can do it. Now, over on the right-hand side, let's go and put in an icon for the account area. So we haven't really put in, we put in one icon, but just remember the little star symbol is for an icon. And you've got two sets of icons that are available in wireframe.cc. One is from the material design set of icons, which is Google's design system or design language that they have available, which has a whole series of icons that go with it. So these are kind of more Google-ish icons. The other set is Font Awesome. So Font Awesome has a huge set of icons, and they're a very common icon set or icon family that's found on a lot of websites. Now, because we've got more of a gearing towards this being a mobile app, I'm going to use the material design set of icons. But if this was more webby, then we could definitely use Font Awesome. Really, for us, it doesn't matter what we're doing. So in here, I'm going to search for something like user for the profile. And you can see straight away, there's this nice little account circle icon. So I'm actually just going to grab that and say, yep, I'll take that account circle. And we can put that up the top right. Obviously, you can make it whatever size you want that to be, and you can position it, wherever you want. I'm just going to leave it up there. And of course, you could put labels around it to say profile or account, or you could just leave the icon there. The importance of having this particular account icon in the top right corner. Now, you guys are probably looking at this and going, oh yeah, I'm familiar with this particular design pattern if you want to be fancy. there is a particular design pattern of having the account or profile icon in the top right corner and having things like a logo on the top left corner. Now, these are just things that if you follow these known design patterns, users are straight away going to be more comfortable with your app's design. They're going to know how to use it intuitively. And so it's actually very clever to copy existing design patterns or copy designs that are already around the place, because your users are going to feel more at home. You know, if they're looking for where is my profile, first place that I look as a user is in the top right. If there's some sort of an icon or a link up there that says account or profile or user, that's where I'm going to head at that stage. You know, if I want to look for main navigation items, I'm going to either look for a hamburger icon and something that says menu, or I'm going to look down the bottom of the app to where we're going to have navigation controls and things as well. You know, so just play into what your users expect, and you will end up creating more intuitive, easily understandable designs, which people are going to feel more comfortable with. And you save yourself time and effort, so that's nice. Anyway, we've got a few components in there. Let's go and put in a main heading. So up the top here, I'm just going to have this heading that spans from the very left to the very right. And I'm going to make this text so that I can actually write content in here. And I'm going to say staff management system. An incredibly boring name. And you guys can, you know, align this however you want. For my homepage, I might make this, you know, slightly different to the other screens again, but I'll just do something like this. Now, I might jump down to the next common component of all these screens, which would be the navigation items down the bottom, or what we often refer to as bottom tab navigation. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw a rectangle out. So again, starting on the left-hand side and moving across to the right. So I'm going to draw a rectangle that covers all the bottom, and I'm just going to tell it to be a box, a generic rectangle. And you can do whatever kind of styling you want for this, but what I'm going to do is basically invert the colors so that this box down the bottom for the bottom tab navigation, if I double click somewhere on the outside of this box, I'm going to change the fill color to be a dark gray, charcoal, and I'm going to change the border color to be transparent, just to remove the border altogether. And so what you end up with is just this rectangle down the bottom of your design that you can now start to put things like icons and labels over the top of for your different navigation items. Now, for me in my storyboard, I set these to, if I can find where my storyboard is, I just wanted to have an icon for home, one for announcements on news. So that was supposed to look like a bell icon, but I made it so scribbly it doesn't really look like anything. And then document management, and then staff, people management. So basically these items here, except home. So home, news, documents, and staff as the 4 main navigation items. Now, if you're doing a lot of work over the top of this shape that you've got down the bottom, you might want to make use of the lock facility that's in wireframe.cc. Now that will just, so if I've got this shape in position and I don't want to deal with this shape again, I can select the shape and just say lock. And of course you can select it again later and say unlock if you want to reverse that action. But basically what locking does is it means that I can't accidentally click and drag it. And it doesn't get in the way when I'm creating other things over the top of it as well. So if you are doing something where this is a shape in the background, it could be a good idea for you to lock it in position. So what I'm going to do now is just go and draw in another little square down here to put in an icon. So I'm just going to put in an icon for home. And again, I'm using the material design icon set. And of course, there's going to be some sort of like little house symbol that I can use here. And you might also notice that the default text color of charcoal on top of charcoal is not exactly accessible. So I want to double click on that icon and change it to be white. so that now my icon has a white fill instead of charcoal. And I'll do some specific layout work a bit later, but I'll create a little text label underneath here as well. So I've just drawn another box. I'm making it text, and I'm going to say that this is home. It's going to be really small. And again, I'm going to set it to be white, and I will center this as well. Now, when you're at this stage, you might find snap to grid a little bit restrictive, like I found it before when I was doing the placeholder text in my login screen. So feel free to turn off snap to grid and do specific layout stuff if you're wanting to. If you're doing other alignment, you might want to do something like your little shift select technique to select both of those, and you can go into your align options and do things like, oh yes, I would like these both to be aligned to the middle or something like that. But yeah, anyhow, that's it. And in this particular example, I'm also not going to do things like playing around with grouping of elements. I don't think it's really worth it for us to play around with grouping, and there are a couple of weird little bugs I've experienced in the past with wireframe.cc and grouping, so I'm not going to mess around with it this time. Grouping, just for your information though, is all about just saying, well, instead of having these as being, in our case here, as an icon and text and separate, we can just select them both and group them into one object, basically, so that when you're doing things like moving them around and positioning them and resizing, it happens as a group instead of individual elements, which can be quite useful for management. Anyway, so I am going to select both of these items here. So my icon and my text, I'm going to copy and paste. Now, there are two forms of copy and paste in wireframe.cc. If I use Control V, do you notice that it just pastes into essentially a random spot? Like, it's probably the very middle of my screen, but essentially it's a random spot. What I want to use is paste in place. So if I do Control Shift V or Command Shift V for Mac people, you can see that that pasted in the exact same location as where that item was copied from. So just remember, Control C, copy, Control Shift V, paste in place, paste in the exact same location. And from there, I can just drag this out to the side and get two icons that are really nicely aligned and everything else. So it's making my job a lot easier. Now, you can also do another little technique, a little trick of if you just click and drag, but you hold down the Alt key as you do that, or possibly Option, then it will end up duplicating. So if I just keep holding down Alt, you can see that every time I click and drag, I'm creating duplicated versions of that, whatever it is I had selected as well. So feel free to, if you want to, use, select both elements and hold down Alt when you drag, or Control C, Control Shift V, and then just drag it out from there. So something like that. So that's not too bad. My alignment for this is a little bit weird, but that's fine. I'm not going to worry too much about specifics, otherwise I'll be here all day. So what do I want here? So I want this to be news. I want this to be, what's the next thing? Documents, I think. Which, you know what, I might just shorten it to docs, because otherwise it's not going to fit in at the moment. And again, I don't want to muck around with different label lengths and things. And then down here, I'm going to change this one to be staff. So home, news, docs, and staff. And then we can go and pick different items, different icons, sorry. So for news, if you double click on the icon and click on where the icon symbol is, you can change it. So if we look for news, we don't get anything. If we look for notification, we're going to get some things about like little, bell announcements and things like that. So I might just use this little bell for news. Docs, double click on the icon and change it. And if I search for doc, we're going to get some sort of document icon. And then staff, I'm just going to use a generic person control, or people. Actually, because it's staff, plural, I might make it people. There we go. Now, again, you can do much nicer stuff about alignment. So these icons are quite close to the top of the navigation area, but that is fine at the moment, right? This is perfect. It's really clear at the moment. Remember, it's not a design concept, so I'm not too worried about things like how much white space I've got. This is more than enough information for my client or a developer to be able to see, okay, that is an icon, that's part of the navigation structure. When I tap on that, I go home. When I tap on this, I go to news. When I tap on that, I go to the docs, the documents. When I tap on this, I do something with staff. So this is perfect at the moment. This is great. You might want to hit Control S, make sure you've got a copy of your wireframe saved. Of course, that's going to give you your URL again. So I'm going to just take that and go and squirrel it away in my document down here. Yep. So I'll just put that down here. Yeah. And then we can get on to the next part. So what's going to be next? The home screen needs to have some buttons on it to point off to those different areas or those main bits of functionality. Now, we're not going to have a button that goes to the home screen because you're already on the home screen, but we do want ones that go, I guess, to news, to the documents, and also to the staff. Now, you could have all these other buttons that appear there for specific people that are logged in. I'm not going to get into the specifics. So let's just come in and say, look, we're going to have a button over here, something like that. Round its corners a bit. You can change the styling to be, whatever you want. So I'm just going to change it to some light gray background. And then we're going to have news. And if I go and duplicate that, I wasn't really sure how big I wanted this to be. So now I know what my size is. I can go and duplicate that again, and it should be the right size. There we go. So that's nice and neat. We're going to have documents, and we're going to have staff. Now, of course, this is not a very nice layout, and very importantly, I haven't specifically thought about what are all the different use cases of someone that lands on this page. If someone is landed in as a manager, maybe you want to give them a button that says you can directly go and add a staff member, for example, or you can directly go to this particular feature. I've just put in these generic buttons that basically are the same as going to news, docs, and staff down the bottom. You don't even have to have a home screen if you don't want to. You could have just taken them directly to news or directly to the staff listing or whatever it happened to be. I've just decided to put in a home screen in this case. There we go. That's done. That's all I want to do for the home screen. So I've got my navigation down the bottom. I've got my main buttons. I've got my title. I've got my little logo and my little account symbol up the top. And that's it. So I'm on to the next wireframe now. So I'm just going to open up again a new browser window. I'm going to go through the same steps of make it a portrait phone screen. It's already on my grid size of 10 pixels. You can turn it back to snap to grid if you want to. whatever, it doesn't really matter at the moment. Now, what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to show not a different screen. I'm going to create another wireframe for the home screen, but in a different state. So I'm going to show what the wireframe looks like when someone taps on this icon up here. And because we can think about what it's going to do, right? If I tap on that icon, I'm probably going to get a link to something like edit or view my profile. And I'm probably going to get another link for something like log out. And you might have all these other things in there as well, but at least I can show, hey, when someone's on the home screen and they tap the account icon, this is what happens. This is what that part looks like. Now, this is not going to create interactive wireframes either. So I'm just going to show, so I've got this wireframe that shows the home screen in its default state. And then this wireframe is going to show the same screen, but in the alternate state. Now, remember I said that from all the screens from the home screen onwards, because they're all very similar to each other, home, view all staff, add staff, whatever, we're going to do copy and paste for this, not recreating from the ground up. So what I want to do, so just remember I've got my two screens here. So I've got my home screen, which is already saved, and that's all wonderful. And then my fresh wireframe over here. So I'm going to go back to my home screen and hit Control or Command A for select all, Control C or Command C for copy. I'm going to go over to my other tab, and then I'm going to do a Control Shift V, paste in place. Now, you might notice that one thing is missing, the background of the navigation, the bottom tabs. And if you're really switched on, you might think, well, that's probably because you locked that background layer, right? So because I locked this layer before, or this object, the background for the bottom tabs, it's not being selected when I select everything else. So what I'm going to do is just clear that out, delete that. I'm going to go back to my home screen, and I'm going to select the box or the rectangle behind the navigation, and I'm going to unlock it. And so now when I hit Control A and Control C, and then go to the other screen and hit Control Shift V, it comes across. Now, I only really wanted to lock it while I was working on it. I don't really care if it's locked or unlocked now, so I'm just going to leave it unlocked for the rest, so it's easy for me to copy and paste it. But it's up to you what you want to do. So in this particular screen, so I'm just going to save this in advance. And I'm going to make a record of it in my Word document. Oh, I didn't take a screenshot of the previous one. So I'm just taking note of the fact that this next wireframe is still the home screen, but it's going to be in a different state, showing the account or profile menu. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to show, using my very limited color palette, that this icon has been selected in this wireframe. Also, just be very careful that you are editing the right wireframe, because it's very easy to go to the wrong tab that you've got open. So I'm on my last tab, my most recent wireframe, and I'm going to change the color of this icon to be my active color, my alternate color, just to show, hey, someone has tapped on this account profile icon. And what happens when they've tapped on that? Well, I'm going to get it so that it basically just displays some sort of drop-down menu. And for this one, I might actually turn my snap to grid back on, so that I can come over here and say, look, yeah, when someone taps on that icon, I'm going to open up a menu which is, about this size. It doesn't really matter. I'm not sure how big I need this to be, so we'll see. And I've just put in a little box. I'll very lightly round the corners, just for WHS reasons. Don't want anyone taking their eye out. And you can change whatever styling you want for this, whatever kind of formats. So there we go. So it's some sort of like pop-up menu that's appearing over the top. And I just want to put in some options. You know, what can someone do when they're inside this menu? So they can, and I'm not going to do this by editing the text because that might be a bit limited, although we could do that. So I'm just going to put in more text boxes over the top. And I'm going to say, look, there's going to be a link where someone can view their profile, which is going to look something like that. There we go, beautiful. And I might not need this to be quite as big. So something like this. We can copy and paste that down and say, look, and what else can they do? They can log out of the system. And if you want to, you can do other things like you can, we saw before that there were, but I'll just draw it up here, make it a bit easier. Whoops. This. We do have things like dividing lines if you want to put one in. So dividing lines are a bit annoying to work with, but basically, you know, you just draw a line of the right kind of size for what you want. And it's just a good way of separating out different areas. Now, I'm not going to leave it in here because I'd have to mess with the styling too much, but they're actually really good if you want to have like 2 columns of text or dividing lines between sections. You can start to put those in. So there we go. So this is just another very, very simple change of like, you know, another wireframe for what does it look like when someone has is on the home screen, but they tap the account icon. So you can see if I toggle between these 2 wireframes, you can see some sort of like interactivity, some sort of state change at that point in time. Now, I didn't do this before, so I'm going to just quickly turn off my grid and take a couple of screenshots of these things. And I'm not going to worry too much about how much of the background I get in here. So this is my home screen. And then I'm just going to take a screenshot of the next one. Again, I'm just going to turn off the grid. And you don't have to take screenshots as you go. Of course, you can just go through at the end, take screenshots of everything. There we go. So now I've got 3 wireframes done, which is just covering 2 different screens of the app. So we've got a home screen and we've got a login screen, which was before the home screen. And we've got this concept where we are showing, you know, different states of one of these particular screens as well. So the next thing that we're going to have a look at is then just using the same techniques that we've already learned at the moment, but just repeating them over and over again for the different screens of the app. So we want to have a couple of different staff listing screens, which is what I'd outlined over here. So, you know, we want to see listings of all the staff. We also want to be able to see the details about staff members. And we also want to be able to do add and edit and things like that as well. So at this stage, you should actually have basically all the techniques that you need as far as all the basics of wireframe.cc and about, you know, copying and pasting content from one wireframe to another, taking screenshots, exporting, about saving, and about all the basics of wireframing. So if you're comfortable to go off and do this on your own now, you can. But if you want to hang around for the next video, I'm going to step through doing the listing of staff, viewing staff details, and then adding and editing staff as well. So if you want a few more little hints and tips, hang around. Otherwise, you're off on your own to create wireframes.